Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Today I want to answer a question that a lot of you asked after our folate crash course, and it has to do with the topic of MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. This is a common gene mutation. There are several different types of these gene mutations, but when people have these, there's a lot of confusion. What a lot of you are being told is if you have this mutation, then you have a problem absorbing folate. And this is false. You do not have a problem absorbing folate if you have an MTHFR mutation. Why is that important to know? Because a lot of doctors on the internet are telling you to take a bunch of folate supplements because you don't absorb folate well, and that's not true. You absorb folate fine unless your gut is damaged, inflamed, leaking, has some type of inflammatory process going on that is interfering with digestion and absorption of food. But the gene mutation has nothing to do with absorption. It has to do with the way folate works once it's in your body. So if you look here, where one of the major places folate works is something called methylation or the carbon cycle, one carbon cycle. And so there are these biochemical processes that occur within your cells where we need folate to properly function. This is where, if you have MTHFR, it is a fundamental issue or potential reduction of function within the cell, but you absorb folate just fine. So I wanted to clear that up because we had we had a few dozen of you writing in asking whether or not you should take extra folate because you don't absorb it because you have MTHFR. Again, absorption and MTHFR are separate issues. They don't have anything to do with each other. So hopefully that clarifies up the MTHFR question for you. Now, welcome to the show today. We're going to dive into your questions about folate first. If you've got questions about folate or B vitamins and their relationship to health or abnormal problems or symptoms, go ahead and start typing those in now. We'll do our best. I'll do my best to get those answered for you today. So let's dive into the show. Filene's asking, how often should a person test their your nutritional absorption or your nutrient levels around B vitamins if you have celiac disease? So if you have celiac disease, you should be testing yourself ideally twice a year. The intracellular type of testing, so again, we go back to what's the best way to test. It's something called INA. That stands for intracellular nutritional analysis. So what it's doing is it's measuring the functionality of your cells based on whether or not they're storing adequate quantities of those B vitamins. And so if you have a celiac history, the issue with celiac disease is if we look at kind of the general, excuse my drawing, it's not fantastic, but you get the point. This is the stomach. This is the esophagus. This down here is the small intestine. So with celiac disease, what happens is you get damage to the villi in the small intestine, and that damage leads to malabsorption. So just like I was saying a moment ago, MTHFR has nothing to do with malabsorption. Celiac disease, on the other hand, has everything to do with malabsorption because of the damage to your small intestine where you absorb nutrients, particularly we're talking about folate here. So if you have a history of celiac disease and you've got all this intestinal inflammation that you're trying to clear up, you want to check this nutritional status 2 times a year, ideally every 6 months. One of the reasons why is when you're using this type of technology, it gives you an average of the last 6 months. So it gives you a window of opportunity to understand what your nutritional needs are over a 6-month period of time. It's very similar to a hemoglobin A1C test that doctors use to measure average blood sugar over a 3 to 4 month period of time, while the INA gives you an average of your nutritional status over a 6-month period of time. And so ideally, you're going to be measuring that twice yearly to stay on top of your nutrition. If I have an MTHFR mutation, what is the best form of folate to use? Supplementally speaking, there's a type of folate we call 5-MTHF. That stands for 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. Some people shorten it or abbreviate it by just saying methylfolate. But you want to use this. What you do not want to use is folic acid. What happens, and the difference is that folic acid is synthetic. There's actually some suspicion in the medical literature on an potential increased risk for certain types of cancers. But this synthetic version has to be methylated, whereas if you take a natural methylfolate, which you can, by the way, you can eat methylfolate too. You can eat it in dark green leafy vegetables. Almonds are a rich source of methylfolate. Supplements can be a great form of methylfolate. But if you're getting folic acid, which unfortunately a lot of doctors prescribe folic acid to their patients, especially if you're taking a drug like methotrexate, which blocks folate. This is synthetic. Your body has to methylate it, which puts tremendous stress on your body. And so it actually works against methylfolate. So this is not something that you really want to use. You want to try to get you, if you're supplementing a 5-MTHF, that's what it will say on the bottle typically. And that's what you want to try to use. If you're trying the synthetic versions, the folic acid, there's another one called folinic acid, which you also are going to want to avoid. Both of these are synthetics, and they will interfere with the way your body properly methylates. Remember, what does that mean, methylation? Methylation is this chemical process in your body whereby you add carbon and hydrogen to different molecules or different agents that help change their functionality. For example, we take serotonin, which is a natural neurochemical, and we methylate it to produce melatonin to help us go to sleep. So that's an example of methylation. There are a lot of different chemical reactions in the body that require the process of methylation. And again, the process of methylation requires folate. That's why it's always best to take a methylated form of folate to work with you as opposed to work against you. Okay. How much folate daily? How much folate should you take? It depends on who you are. It depends on your age. If we're talking about the average adult, folate, when we take it, it used to be, so there's depending on the label, I'll kind of give you, so there's something called a DFE, dietary folate equivalents. That's the new way that food labeling has gone to. The old labeling was micrograms. So you could either take dietary folate equivalents or micrograms. They're basically the same thing. They've just changed the way labels are done. But the average adult needs about 600 micrograms or folate equivalents per day. If you're pregnant, if you're aggressively exercising, if you have MTHFR mutations, it's going to be better if you're hitting somewhere in that 800 to 1,000 mcgs per day. And again, you can do a lot of this through diet. You don't necessarily need supplementation. But if we're looking at kind of decent doses for supplementation, first of all, always work with your doctor if you're going to go high dosing. But 800 to 1,000 micrograms a day is super safe, super effective. There's been a lot of studies at that dosing, and that's generally where when somebody comes to see me, if their folate levels are low, I'm going to start them here. Between 800 and 1,000 micrograms or dietary folate equivalents a day of a methylated form of folate. Jean makes a comment, so I want to just point something out. So Jean says the hardest thing is when you take IBS or when you have IBS D, meaning irritable bowel syndrome with constipation. If you take folic acid, iron, then it only causes more constipation. So don't take the iron. It's one thing if you're anemic and your doctors put you on iron, but you can also use liver as a food source and get lots of fantastic iron from your diet. Folic acid is the wrong thing to take. As I just mentioned, you want to take natural folate, methyl folate, and it does not constipate. So probably what's causing your constipation is the actual iron in the supplementation a lot, especially if you're already prone to constipation. Iron as a supplement for many people can be a cause or a trigger for constipation. I have thalassemia. Should I take folate? I was told to. You can. What folate does is it helps to stimulate the production of red blood cells, the healthy maturation of red blood cells out of bone marrow. So the way we make our red blood cells is in the bone marrow. We have these stem cells. Those stem cells are stimulated by a hormone from your kidneys to make red blood cells, and then red blood cells mature and form the right shape. That requires folate. So it's not a bad idea if you have thalassemia to have your folate levels measured and monitored, because of course you want to, with that type of anemia, you want to do everything you can nutritionally to support healthy shaped red blood cells. So Jenny's asking a question. So first of all, I'm not going to interpret anybody's lab tests in this format. It's just not an appropriate place. It's not really, wouldn't be ethical for me to try to interpret your labs, not knowing you, not knowing your history, etc. But I'm going to comment on this question. You know, your folate level that you're listing here is most likely a serum folate value. And I want you to understand something about lab testing for folate. So, because if you do the lab testing wrong, you're going to try to draw the wrong conclusions. And unfortunately, a lot of doctors aren't trained in nutrition, so they don't know the right lab tests to do. But if you're trying to lab test folate, you do not want serum folate. And the reason why, serum folate is synthetic folic acid plus food-based methylfolates. And so when you get a value, it's these two things combined, right? So this is your serum value. And it's going to be inaccurate because you don't want to include folic acid in that equation, because folic acid actually blocks the proper use of folate. And so this is one of the reasons why serum checks aren't super accurate. Another reason why serum checks aren't super accurate is I could have you the night or the day before eat a super rich green salad with lots of folates in it, and then check your lab the next morning in a lab test, and I could get this artificial inflation because serum adjusts day to day based on your most current foods, based on your most current meals. This is why you want that INA check. That INA check tells you your average over 6 months. So it's going to give you a much better read on, you know, are you deficient in folate or are you not? Because again, that serum test is going to be, did you not eat enough folate yesterday, right? So it doesn't really give you any long-term help in understanding what your folate needs are. Now, there's some other types of tests. If your doctor doesn't know INA and you're still trying to get some information about folate, there are some other types of tests that you can ask for that they may do, and they may or may not. Again, every doctor's a little different here, but one of the more common tests that acts as a surrogate marker is a test called homocysteine. And it's a very simple blood test. And if you have homocysteine that is higher than 9, usually it's millimoles per liter is the way that is usually measured. If it's higher than that, then you might consider that you have either a folate, a vitamin B12, a vitamin B6, a vitamin B2, or a choline deficiency. And the reason why is because you need these nutrients to help transform homocysteine into another substance called methionine. You can see here, if we can blow this up a little bit, make it a little bit bigger here. You see right here, this is this chemical again, homocysteine. We turn homocysteine into methionine. This is a cycle. And in order to get from homocysteine to methionine, you can see here where it says B12, you can see here where it says TMG, that's trimethylglycine. There's a shortcut through here. This is a choline-based shortcut. And then we also, you can see B6 helps to convert homocysteine into, we go far enough, we get glutathione down here. So we go down through this pathway. And then you also have folate required here in this conversion here. That's what this is. It's helping get that conversion. So again, you need B12, you need folate, you need vitamin B6 to convert homocysteine to glutathione, and you need vitamin B2 and choline. Vitamin B2 works over here to help this process right here. So if you have high levels of homocysteine, in other words, if these levels are going up over 9, it generally means that these things are being blocked and you can't get back to methionine. And so think of it as a surrogate marker for those B vitamin deficiencies. And so folate is one of the major B vitamins responsible for that conversion. And so what you've listed there, Jenny, and as far as your lab values, it's hard for me to comment because of a lack of history, but it's most likely what you've had done is a serum folate. And serum folate is not a good measure. It's not a good indicator that you have a folate deficiency. So look at homocysteine. If it's above 9, you really want your homocysteine ideally to be about a 7, somewhere in that range. Now, the lab reference ranges for homocysteine, when you go to your doctor, some of the newer lab reference ranges will tell you that it's normal as high as 18. That's wrong. They keep raising the reference range for folate. I don't know why, but it unfortunately it's problematic. Nine years ago, my mom's homocysteine level was 17. Her doctor told her to take folic acid instead of folate, and she died of a stroke a year later. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Mark. She was also on lisinopril and a diuretic. So if she was on a diuretic, she was, her doctor was already depleting her B vitamins through the action of that diuretic. Diuretics are a common cause of B vitamin deficiency, and then lisinopril can affect zinc and CoQ10 and contribute to heart disease in that way as well. I hate to hear that happened to her. I have MTHFR, homozygous for MTHFR. I quit taking folic acid from food and supplements years ago. When I have a blood folic acid test, the test says that I'm really high. Remember what I just said, Joanne? It's the blood test that you're having done measures synthetics as well as food-based. If your levels of folate are really high, it could just be that because your diet is high in folate, your levels in your serum are high. But remember that folate doesn't work in your bloodstream, it works in your cell. And that's the other reason why it's super important to look at folate from a cell perspective, right? So if you've got your bloodstream here and you're measuring folate here, you don't know whether the folate is making it to the cell, right? Inside the cell is where it does and performs all those different biochemical functions. And so this is another reason why if you measure it in the serum, well, how do you know it made it into the cell? It's so much more important to measure INA, intracellular analysis, so that does the folate make it from the highway into the blood superhighway into the cell itself? It's kind of like, it's kind of like traffic, right? Think of the bloodstream as the traffic jam that you drive through to get to work, but think of the work building that you go into as the cell. And you could leave for work that morning and never get through the traffic and make it into the building. And that's the difference, right? If you don't make it to work, maybe you left for work. Maybe your intention was there, but you didn't actually get to the point. So never rely on the serum test as a means to give you an answer as to whether or not your folate is normal or not. Do I know a company that measures or manufactures gluten-free, dairy-free prepper food kits? No, the ones that claim to be gluten-free, it's junk. And all of them are, I would say all of them. A few of them are doing now organic, like powdered prep foods, but most of those powdered prep foods contain a vast array of corn, rice, and other nefarious grains that you don't want. So we have preparation that we do at home personally. We just do a lot of canning. If you do a lot of your own canning, you can can meat, you can can beans, you can can dried fruits, you can can vegetables. You can can wet fruits. I mean, there's so many easy things to do within canning as opposed to that dried powder. Look, if it's the end of the world and I need prep food, one of the things I don't want is this crappy dehydrated food that will make me feel horrible so that I can't function and have my brain and my physical body present with me if I absolutely needed to in those potential times. So I don't recommend any of those. And I don't know that you could really make a healthy prepper gluten grain-free food because the act of that ultra processing destroys the nutritional value of the food in and of itself. And so home canning is your best bet. Can folate help for non-diabetic hypoglycemia? I mean, where folate can play a role is it can help you generate energy from carbohydrates. And so in that regard, it could help you, it could help you process the nutrient energy from the food that you eat. But is folate going to have a direct impact or effect on your blood sugar? Probably not. Let's see here. Why are celiacs tired the whole day long if we accidentally eat something wrong? Does the body's immune system take that much energy? I have days that I need a lot of bedtime, 16 hours or so. Look, if you are doing your diet right and you get accidental exposure, everyone's a little different in that way, including celiac versus what we would say non-celiac gluten-sensitive individuals. I see some people where even small amounts of gluten will wreck them. That being said, if you're doing everything right and you're doing everything well over a long enough period of time, you do build resiliency. You shouldn't be tired all the time if you eat something wrong, although you shouldn't be eating wrong things, right? So when you say, when I eat something wrong, I'm not clear what you mean by that. If you get gluten, if that's what you mean, or if you just go off the deep end and have a horrible meal that's not good for you. So maybe give me better clarity so I can give you better context. Okay, so this is a great question. I was taking over 1,400 micrograms of methylfolate for 6 months. Recent symptoms included headaches, feeling wired and tired before bed, and irritability. Symptoms subsided after discontinued use of folate. Thoughts? Yeah, you were taking too much for too long. There are certain circumstances where you can overdo B vitamins. And so one of the side effects of too much B vitamin is exactly what you just described. It's that wired and tired feeling. It's also, we see where people don't tolerate high doses of methylfolate, and it's not just methylfolate, but it's also methylated B vitamins. So like methylcobalamin would be the B12 version of methylated B12. If you have mold in your environment, so if you're basically being poisoned by your house, these individuals don't do well with high doses of methylated vitamins at all. It actually gives them a lot of this, wired, tired type of symptom, makes them feel horrible. But also we'll see something similar in people that have yeast overgrowth in their guts. This can happen. So in those types of cases, those individuals should be just more cautious about approaching their B vitamin supplementation. So if you're thinking about B vitamin supplementation, but you have a yeast overgrowth, I wouldn't go on the high side of dosing. I would go on the kind of the lower conservative side with that type of individual. So keep that in mind. That's probably maybe something you want to look into as well, as to whether or not you have that background of yeast or mold. I'm anemic. What's the best way to get B vitamins and iron, or the best supplements? I'm based in the UK. So what kind of anemia are you, right? So there are different kinds of anemia. There's definitely iron deficiency anemia. And if that's what you mean, the best food source for iron is liver, hands down. And liver consumption can be just as powerful as any supplement in my experience. So if you don't do well, a lot of you don't do well with iron supplementation, as I mentioned earlier, because of constipation. or because of nausea. Iron can be upsetting to the stomach for some people. Go to food-based sources, and liver going to be hands down one of the best places to get a bioavailable form of iron that absorbs really well. Now, if you're following a plant-based diet, you have to understand iron's not rich in plant foods because it's bound to things like oxalate and phytate that are in the plant. So that bioavailability of that iron is not so great. So if you're on a plant-based diet, you're trying to get more iron through plant-based foods, it helps to take extra vitamin C. Vitamin C will actually help you increase your ability to absorb iron from plant-based sources. As far as B vitamins are concerned, liver is another great way to get B vitamins in, but a good reputable brand of product that's processed, in my opinion, it needs to be gluten-free, it needs to be grain-free, and the vitamins in the product should ideally, the B vitamins should be methylated, because if you're in the UK, you can't, generally we don't sell at Gluten-Free Society, we don't sell to the UK. But look at our label, look at B Complete. And if you can find a comparable product with similar ingredients in the UK from a reputable company, that would be, again, where I would start with that. Question about our nutrient testing. If you have a question about our nutrient testing, the best way to get that answered is to reach out to my customer support team. We actually have a webinar on how to read and look at that test as well. And if you haven't attended that webinar, I'd highly encourage you to just reach out to our customer service team and they can send that link to you and you can watch that webinar. Why would my MCH be high in my EO? What do you mean by EO? Give me which acronym that you're referring to, Jill, and I can give you better context. I know MCH is mean corpuscular hemoglobin, but what do you mean by EO? I want to make sure we're talking the same language. My doc says I can't be deficient because my levels are high. It's because your doc hasn't trained in nutrition and doesn't know how to interpret the test, Kathleen. So as I just mentioned before, folic acid serum values are not a representation of full body storage of folate or adequacy of folate. Why would I break out in hives when I take extra folate? You could have, so one of the things folate can do is it can influence histamine. And so if that's what's happening, Samantha, you might have an environmental histamine problem. Number one thing that causes that type of reaction, in my experience, is when somebody has mold in their background environment. So again, that would be one of my first suspicions. Can food synergy be helpful? If so, is there a good resource? What do you mean by food synergy? If you're referring to the consumption of the right foods that contain folate along with supplementation, absolutely. But I don't know, Gene, what you mean by food synergy. Can we put a link up for Shelly? Shelly wants to check out the micronutrient testing. Why would I get migraine headaches at night? There's a lot of reasons why you could get migraines. Shelly, we'll also put a link up for you on our migraine crash course, and you can check that out. It goes super in depth into the number of different triggers behind why people get migraine headaches. Can you get a sufficient B vitamin, or can you get a sufficient vitamin B spectrum from consumer liver or from consumption of liver at least 5 times a week? And is that amount of liver consumption harmful? Depends on the dose, the quantity of liver. Can you overconsume liver? Yeah, one of the biggest risks to overconsumption of liver is vitamin A toxicity. So too much liver, you got to worry about vitamin A going too high. When your vitamin A goes too high, it's going to interfere with your vitamin D, and that can create problems in and of itself. But then there are potential symptoms with vitamin A toxicity. So what dose is right for which person? There's no standardized answer to that question, because there are a lot of people that have you know, that can consume a couple ounces of liver 5 days a week and do just fine. And then there may be other people, maybe smaller weights or sizes, et cetera, that's too much for them and their vitamin A levels start to climb and it creates an issue. So the best answer I can give you is if you're using liver as a major source of B vitamin in your diet, consider getting checked periodically so that you don't overdo it. But as a general rule of thumb, you know, if we're talking about beef liver or chicken liver, those are generally pretty safe. If we're talking about bear liver, that's some of the highest potential for vitamin A toxicity that you can get. So part of it depends on the species of the liver. Part of it depends on the size and the quantity that you're eating. Part of it depends on the size and quantity of you. Part of it depends on the day-to-day variable in your own personal life and what your nutritional needs are and what your stress levels are. There's just a lot of variability to unpack in that. I was diagnosed celiac 8 years ago and also chronic erectile dysfunction, but recently had pain in the internal penile area. Doc told me that I have inflamed blood vessels and gave me a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory and blood circulation drug. Did he test your, I mean, did he do a UA on you? You know, it's hard for me to comment, but I would suggest, Pranjal, that you have asked for a UA with a culture. Because if you're having internal penile pain, you might have a urinary tract infection that's just not being diagnosed, and that's a potential possibility. But I would just, I mean, I think it's bad form to say you have inflammation and to put you on an NSAID without asking why you have the inflammation. So again, that's the question that I would encourage you to talk to your doctor about. Is if he's telling you have inflammation, where's the inflammation coming from? If you're celiac, one of the biggest mistakes that celiac people make is they do the diet wrong. And so their inflammation never truly resolves. And so you may be following a gluten-free diet in the traditional sense where you're avoiding wheat, barley, and rye. But if you're still eating corn and rice and sorghum and millet and a number of these other grains and oats that are labeled gluten-free, you're probably going to have the best bang for your buck if you just follow no grain, no pain. If you're not familiar with that, that's my book. You can get a copy on Amazon or any other major book outlet. And I would encourage you to check that diet out if you're not already following something similar. Can I take vanadium without talking to a doctor if it shows a deficiency? Yes, you can. Vanadium is safe to take. Now, you don't want to megadose vanadium for any long period of time. We actually have a crash course on vanadium getting ready to come out. So you might want to just poise for the anticipation of that class. But if you're looking for a good supplemental vanadium, we have a product called Ultra Chromium. And within that product, there's chromium in that product, but there's also vanadium in that product. And the reason why is they work synergistically together to help support your body's ability to regulate blood glucose. And so, and the dose of vanadium in that product is a decent amount without overdoing it. Laura says, considering taking methylated B vitamins per genetics, MTHFR, MTR, MTRR, COMT, SOD2, confused because intracellular testing showed that I'm not low on Bs, but was for methionine, homocysteine is low, terrible brain fog. So you don't have to have, this is what I was saying earlier, you can be, you can have genetic mutations for MTHFR, for MTRR, for COMT, et cetera. It doesn't mean that you're not absorbing those B vitamins. It goes back to the misconfusion, the misrepresentation that a lot of internet people have put out there on these gene mutation issues. It's not an issue of whether or not you can absorb those nutrients. It's an issue of whether or not those nutrients are working inside of your cells at the right capacity. Your question that you ask about your homocysteine and your methionine and everything else, that's complex. You need to get help and you need to work with somebody who can help you understand that better. But taking a bunch of B vitamins when you don't have low B vitamin levels, if you've taken our intracellular test and your B vitamins aren't low, taking a bunch of B vitamins is not going to solve that issue. So any direction around best practice with replacing folic acid with quattrofolic when on methotrexate, typically 5 milligrams of folic acid the day after the injection and 1 milligram daily, except the day of the injection. This is the same kind of dosing structure, although I wouldn't, I've seen a lot of people, Eric, with RA, where what I try to do is I try to keep them on a solid, approximately 2,000 milligrams a day. I'm sorry, not 2,000 milligrams, but 2,000 micrograms a day of 5 MTHF. But then I monitor their folate levels because, again, when you're using a drug like methotrexate, it's a folate antagonist. So it's important to not just make that switch without having your levels monitored, because you may find that you need to go up in that dose or down in that dose, depending on, what happens in your monitoring. So always, and again, always talk with your rheumatologist about it too. But I've seen this a lot where we put people who have rheumatoid arthritis and are on methotrexate, where we put them on quattrofolate instead of their folic acid, and they do perfectly fine and well. But ultimately, Eric, if you're having to take methotrexate, the bigger question here is not what can I take with my methotrexate to prevent folate deficiency? It's why do you need methotrexate to manage your inflammation? You should have that dialed in. In other words, if you do have RA, if you're finding out or asking what are the triggers for your RA, that's a better route to take for you than to just take methotrexate for the rest of your life, because methotrexate also destroys the gut lining. And so there's a whole nother slew of problems that come with that, right? Because when your gut lining is being damaged, you malabsorb. And when you malabsorb over enough years, now you end up with other types of nutritional deficiencies that will prevent you from ever being able to fully heal from RA. So I wrote No Grain, No Pain largely because of a patient experience with RA. If you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to read it and follow along with the diet there. You might find yourself not needing methotrexate in your future if you can dial that in. Yeah, so again, those of you that are pumping in all of your medical lab information, this is not, I can't answer your direct medical lab questions. This is not the forum for that. If you need somebody to do that, you really need to work with somebody directly, because it wouldn't be fair to me to try to answer your question in that regard. I don't have enough information about who you are, your history, or anything else for me to just, irresponsibly give out a bunch of commentary about your specific lab. I did blood work recently, and my doctor told me that I'm anemic. She prescribed iron tablets. She said that I should eat green leafy vegetables. Is there a question in that, Desiree, or is that just more of a commentary? How to improve folate absorption? Well, number one, you make sure you don't have inflammation in your GI tract, because your gut is going to absorb folate perfectly, fantastically well from healthy, great foods that you're eating. But if your gut's inflamed because you're subjecting it to various sundry problematic foods, processed foods, ultra processed foods, derivatives, dyes, etc., then you might have inflammation in your gut, and that's going to impact your absorption. So the best way to have healthy gut function is to eat whole, real foods on a regular basis and not pump chemicals and garbage into your body, because it's what you put in your mouth is going to directly impact the way your gut functions and works to help you absorb nutrients. So, question about hereditary hemochromatosis. Can hereditary hemochromatosis cause elevations in MCV and MCH? Potentially, there's a lot of reasons that could be the case, and one of them, with MCV being elevated chronically, it could be folate and it could be vitamin B12 deficit, but it could also be vitamin B6 deficit as well. B6 is one of the often under investigated components that can also drive up MCV. So you might want to ask your doctor or have that conversation with your doctor. Is it possible to recover from gluten in cow's milk sensitivity? No. If you're truly genetically gluten sensitive, it's genetic. You're not going to recover from that. It's just who you are, and you need to change your diet. If you have cow milk sensitivity, um, so there's a lot of crossover. You should probably, Dorianne, the best way to answer that question, because it's pretty complex, is to watch our show on gluten and dairy, where I go into the nuance of both of those categories together, as is in the context of your question. We'll put a link to that show for you to go and check out. I think, again, Jill, I don't know what you mean by EO. Are you referring to eosinophils on your white count differential? I'm not sure what you mean by that number. How can I increase my total cholesterol? I have around 100 total cholesterol levels for some years now. I've been struggling with severe adrenal fatigue for some time. You know, it's a tough question, because there's a lot of reasons why you might have low cholesterol. But I mean, dietarily speaking, one of the best ways to increase your cholesterol is to increase your animal fat consumption. So if you're not already looking at that, Philippe, that would be something I would highly encourage you to check out. A lot of people are scared to do that because there's a ton of rhetoric around, animal meats being unhealthy, or animal meats contributing to cancer and heart disease. And all of that's rhetoric. All these guys online, there are a lot of doctors online that talk about, plant-based diets being, superior over animal-based foods. It's most of it's based on epidemiological studies that don't show a causal relationship. They show corollary relationship data, and correlation is not causation. So a lot of that research is junk science that is used to manipulate the minds of people to not eat protein. Then that being said, some people do better on plant-based diets, but Philippe, maybe, I don't know where you're at and all that, but I would encourage you to look at, quantitatively how much animal protein and fat you're consuming. If you're trying to elevate your cholesterol through diet, remember, 75% of cholesterol production is under the influence of the liver directly. 25% of it is under the influence of your diet. So you've got to eat more of it. And the way to do that is animal fat. Let's go down on the right a little bit and on the left as well. Can EMFs from a smart electric meter hinder the detoxification of mycotoxins? I don't know that anybody has any evidence that shows directly that, Chip. I think we could surmise that being exposed to high level of EMF fields can put stress and pressure on your body's systems that might interfere with detoxification pathways, but that would be a speculative thought versus an actual research verified connection. I would say anytime a person has multiple exposures to multiple environmental poisons, the answer to that speculative question is probably yes. It's probably going to affect your ability to have a good recovery, but whether or not it directly impacts mycotoxin biotransformation by your liver, we don't have an answer to that question. I'm on a blood thinner for an AFib mini stroke, and it's causing diarrhea. Filler in the anticoagulant is carrageenan. Yeah, carrageenan is toxic to the gut. Would that cause the problem? It could. What I would do, Linda, is talk with your prescribing doctor about either finding you a different blood thinner if he wants you on a blood thinner for that reason, and ask him for a different variety, see if he's got something without carrageenan in it, or ask him to write you a prescription for a compounded version of the same drug without the carrageenan as a filler. Carrageenan has a pretty long track record of causing inflammation in the guts of animals in research. We don't have any great research on humans, but we know in animals, carrageenan is definitely a GI inflammatory trigger. So I would surmise that's a good theory. Let's see here. I saw your presentation on bone health, but couldn't find it again on YouTube. What test can I do to determine my present status? I have bone on bone through small toes. So we'll put a link up, Betty, to that presentation so you can find it. But if you're talking about what tests you can do to determine or help you to discern your bone health, you need to get your nutrition levels checked, because your bone matrix is largely produced as a result of nutrition, right? Protein, collagen, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, all play a role in forming healthy bone and regulating bone production. The other thing that will affect bone health is autoimmune bone loss as a result of autoimmune inflammation. So you can, if you haven't, been properly assessed in that way, maybe you already have pre-existing autoimmune disease, and that could be impacting your bone. But if you're talking about specific tests that help measure your bone turnover, there are some urine tests that you can ask your doctor to run, namely being deoxypyridinoline, osteocalcin, and pyridinium cross-link. So those three markers are really good markers to help you understand how fast your bone is breaking down versus how fast you're building new bone. How do you heal frozen shoulder? Lots of ways. There are lots of therapies that can be done for a frozen shoulder. Ultimately, you want to know why it originally froze up on you in the first place. Again, we always go back to root cause. What caused the problem? Because any kind of passive therapy like ultrasound, laser therapy treatments, cryotherapies, deep myofascial tissue therapies, manipulative therapies, either from a good chiropractor or osteopathic doctor, would all be good options to treat a frozen shoulder. But why did it freeze up? And we see a lot of frozen shoulder predominantly from people who are inactive. They don't use their muscles on a regular day-to-day basis. And so what happens over time is those shoulder muscles atrophy. And so then they go to use them aggressively when they're atrophied, and then they injure them, right? And so then that sets the stage for this chronic inflammation in an already atrophied muscle. So you can do a lot of those adjuvant therapies. If they don't work, you can go one step higher and get with a good orthopedic doctor and who does like proteins or prolotherapies or stem cells are all options to have injectables into a shoulder. But those would be good places to start. How to decrease cholesterol and triglycerides? Well, Mandy, I would say depending on how high your cholesterol is, I'm not a big fan of being worried about cholesterol. I mean, unless you have hyperfamilial cholesterolemia, but if you have generally what doctors call high cholesterol, remember, I started practice 23 years ago, and normal cholesterol used to be 280. And from 23 years ago to today, they've lowered the cholesterol reference range to, originally it took it from 280 to 250, from 250 to 220, then from 220, now they're saying 200. Where do we stop with the attack on cholesterol? We've been attacking cholesterol for over 30 years, and we don't have less heart disease or less strokes or less risk of these problems as a result of attacking cholesterol and lowering cholesterol pharmacologically. So to me, asking about cholesterol, it's the wrong question to ask. Cholesterol does not increase your risk for stroke or heart attack, in my opinion. So it's really not something that's worth measuring unless you're actually measuring the smaller particulate cholesterols that can increase certain risks in certain individuals. But really, cholesterol doesn't have a bearing on your risk as much as inflammation has a bearing on your risk. Remember, cholesterol responds to inflammation. So if you control your inflammation, you don't have to worry about your cholesterol. So you might want to watch my video, Mandy, on the cholesterol myth. We can put a link up and you can go learn a lot more about cholesterol. As far as triglycerides are concerned, the way we lower triglycerides is by eating reasonable amount of carbohydrates or lower carbohydrate diets. Triglycerides are fat in your blood, and a lot of times doctors will tell you eat less fat or go on a low-fat diet, but low-fat diets don't lower triglycerides because high carbohydrate diets elevate triglycerides. When your body eats too many carbohydrates, it doesn't know what to do with them because it can't burn the energy in those carbs. So what it will do is it will recognize that they are an energy source, and it will want to store that energy for a rainy day. So it will convert those carbs into triglycerides and store those into fat cells. So if you really want to lower your triglycerides, you've got to get your carbohydrate consumption in check. Oats bother me more than gluten. That's because gluten is in oats. Gluten-free oats is a misnomer. It's a myth. There's no such thing as a gluten-free oat. All oats contain a form of gluten called avenin. So you have to understand the labeling laws and how that whole gluten-free history plays out. We have a nice video on that history that you might want to check out, because that's true for a lot of you that think you're eating gluten-free, but you're eating oatmeal or oat milk or whatever it might be, oat whatever. You're really not eating gluten-free if you're consuming oats on a regular basis. Is it okay to use xylitol in people who are diabetic? Yes. Yeah, xylitol can be used. Can too much folate use by pregnant women increase the risk for autism in children? I haven't seen enough data to say that that's the case at all, Dennis. So I would say, is there a potential possibility? Yes. Is there confirmed research that shows yes, that is the case? No. Reasonable use of folate in pregnant women, I would say, is perfectly safe. Again, I'm a big advocate, especially in pregnancy, of testing. So like if you're a pregnant woman listening to this and you're wanting to take extra folate and you're mega dosing folate and you're not having your levels checked, you should be. Testing is such a big, important part of the process of knowing. Are you going to vote come November? I am. And I hope you are too. I do eat fats, but I don't have much appetite. But 75% of cholesterol comes from liver production. Shouldn't my cholesterol be at least 150 regardless if I'm to eat more fats or not? Not necessarily. You could have a liver problem. You could have liver damage. You could have a problem with the process of producing cholesterol in your liver adequately. You really should work with a doctor, but getting your levels of choline and inositol checked would also be important. Your other B vitamins are going to be important in the metabolism, the appropriate production of cholesterol. And so those are all other areas and avenues that you would want to look at. Jill says, my husband's nutrient testing came back and lots of insufficient and borderline deficiencies. He says, oh no, not another pill. Haha, thank you for giving me extra work. You're welcome. But hopefully that helps him be the healthiest that he can possibly be. Okay. I think we're right at time here. Thanks for tuning in today to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. If I didn't get to your question today, no offense. We just don't have time to answer all the questions that come in. We're here, though, every Thursday. So you can come back next Thursday at 12:30 Central Standard Time for another episode where we take all your nutritional questions live. And don't forget to tune in on Tuesday for a crash course on the Dr. Osborne Zone. Hey, look, if you want to support our mission and everything that goes into creating these videos every week for you, consider supporting us at Gluten Free Society. You can do that several ways. One, you can go visit the site and you can participate in sharing the information that the site has to offer with others that you care about and love, because our mission, again, is to save 100 million lives. And we can't do that without you sharing the information, because we're being censored everywhere we go. Number two, you can sign up for our newsletter. If you sign up for our newsletter, we'll send you a bunch of fantastic information about how to navigate diet and lifestyle change to overcome autoimmunity. And number three, if you're in the market for great supplements or lab tests that help you identify nutritional problems, consider using us. We have state-of-the-art lab, and we have fantastic array of supplements that that can take on a lot of different roles for whatever your needs might be. So again,